My name is Eric Arthur Blair, and I was born on the 25th of June, 1903, in Motihari, Bengal, India. Back then, it was part of the British Empire. My father, Richard Walmsley Blair, was born in 1857. When he was 18, he went to India to work for the civil service as an opium agent. His job was to oversee the production of opium, which the British mainly sold to China. It made a lot of money for the empire. My mother, Ida Mabel Limousin, married my father when she was 21. She was born in Surrey to a French father and an English mother, and she grew up in Molmine, Burma. Her family were well-known merchants there. When she married my father, she was working as a governess, and she followed him around India as he did his work. My parents had quite an age gap. My father was 39 when he married my mother, who was half his age. They had 2 children together. My older sister, Marjorie, was born in 1898, and then I came along in 1903, right after my father got a new post near the Nepalese border. Even though the Blair family had some aristocratic roots going back to the 18th century, by the time I was born, we were really just upper middle class, and not rich at all. As a kid, I didn't grow up wealthy, but I always knew we had a certain social status because of how British society worked. In 1904, my mother took me and my sister back to England, while my father stayed behind in India. I was a sickly baby, always having problems with my lungs, something that would trouble me my whole life. By late 1905, we settled in Henley-on-Thames in Oxfordshire. Even though I liked spending time by myself, I later remembered my childhood as a happy time. I was especially close to my mother. My relationship with my father wasn't great, mostly because I barely saw him until he retired and came back from India in 1912 when he was 55. He did come back for a short visit in 1907, and during that time, my parents had their 3rd child, my sister Avril, who was born in 1908. The England I grew up in felt peaceful and safe. Kids could play freely in the streets. King Edward VII, who was king when I was little, brought a fun and lively spirit to the country, very different from his mother, Queen Victoria. Britain was the most powerful empire in the world, and people like my father worked to bring wealth from the colonies back to London through trade. Of course, even during peaceful times, bad things happened. I still remember hearing about the sinking of the RMS Titanic on the 15th of April, 1912. It was terrifying to think about. But an even greater disaster hit when the First World War started in the summer of 1914. I was 11 years old, and it felt like the peaceful world I knew had been destroyed. As a kid, I loved reading fiction and started writing at an early age. My mother had big dreams for my education, so in the summer of 1911, I started going to St. Cyprian's School near Eastbourne in Sussex. It was meant to prepare boys like me for public school. We studied Latin, Greek, English, history, and math. I did pretty well there, staying near the top of my class, and I was good at cricket too. Around the time I started school, my father retired and moved back to England for good. Our family then moved to a small village called Shiplake, just a few miles outside Henley. While living there, I became close friends with the Boodicombe family, Jacintha, Prosper, and Guinevere. Jacintha and I shared a love for books, and even at 11 years old, I dreamed about becoming a famous writer. I wrote plays inspired by Shakespeare and would read them out loud to her. When war broke out in August 1914, I watched crowds of young men at the train station, grabbing evening newspapers as they arrived. I was so moved that I wrote a patriotic poem encouraging young Englishmen to join the army. It was printed in the local newspaper in early October and even read aloud at my school. Everyone seemed to like it. Later on, though, when I looked back, I really came to hate my time at St. Cyprian's. When I was younger, I wrote a 15,000-word essay about my school days. It wasn't published until 1968. In it, I talked about how Mr. Wilkes, the headmaster, beat me. I also wrote about the bad living conditions, terrible food, and how the school treated the kids from rich families better because they could pay full fees. Later, some of my classmates said I had exaggerated or even made up a lot of it. Maybe I didn't remember everything clearly. Still, while I was there, I kept doing well in school. I won the English prize in 1915 and the Classics prize in 1916. In 1916, I won a Classics scholarship to Wellington College. That same year, I took the entrance exam for Eton and came in 13th. Since there were only 12 scholarships, I had to wait for someone to drop out. In early 1917, I spent one term at Wellington, and when a spot opened up, I moved to Eton. Eton College, founded by King Henry VI in 1440, was, and still is, the most famous school in England, where many future leaders studied. When I looked back, I made it seem like I didn't belong there. I said I was only there because of a scholarship and felt lower than the other students. But the truth is, as a King Scholar, I didn't have to pay fees and was part of a special group who lived right inside the college grounds. Even so, after working hard at St. Cyprian's, I relaxed too much at Eton. My grades fell. Even though I had a classic scholarship, I ended up doing badly in Latin and got moved into an easier class called Classical General Studies. My chances of getting into Oxford or Cambridge grew smaller. When I started at Eton in May 1917, the Great War was still going on, but people's excitement about it had faded. The war dragged on along the Western Front. At Eton, we didn't think much about it anymore. Even the Russian Revolution that year didn't seem to get much attention, but the war still changed my family's life. In 1917, my father, Richard Blair, joined the army as a second lieutenant at the age of 60 and went to France. My mother, Ida, moved to London to work at the Ministry of Pensions. We had moved back to Henley in 1915, but we rented out our house. So during holidays, my younger sister Avril and I stayed with the Budicom family. I kept writing to Jacintha Budicom about my dreams of becoming a writer. Around this time, I was really inspired by G.K. Chesterton, H.G. Wells, and D.H. Lawrence. Even after the war ended and my father came back in 1919, I spent most of my free time with the Budicoms. I even wrote romantic poems for Jacintha. By 1920, I had 1 year left at Eton. My parents started talking about what I should do next. I wanted to go to university, and my mother supported me, but my father wanted me to join the Imperial Civil Service like he had. In the end, he won. Even if I had wanted to go to Oxford, my bad grades meant getting a scholarship was almost impossible. After my final term at Eton at the end of 1921, I packed my things and moved to Southwold, a seaside town in Suffolk where my parents had retired. In June 1922, just a few days after my 19th birthday, I passed the entrance exam for the Indian Imperial Police. It was a solid career, even if not a very exciting one. I asked to be posted to Burma because my mother had spent a lot of her childhood there, and my grandmother was still living there. After spending that summer with the Budicoms, I sailed from Liverpool on the 27th of October. I reached Yangon, the capital of Burma, about a month later. On the 28th of November, I took a train to Mandalay to begin police training. Burma had only recently been taken over by the British. Back in 1885, British and Indian soldiers captured the royal palace in Mandalay and forced King Tiba to give up his throne. Britain mainly wanted Burma for its rice, oil, and timber. Unlike other colonies, they wiped out the local government and made Burma part of India, keeping the country under military rule. By the time I arrived, the political unrest had died down a bit, but crime was rising. In 1924 alone, there were about 800 murders, and the prisons were packed with around 16,000 inmates. Burma was a tough place for a newcomer from Europe. The heat was brutal. The monsoon rains were endless, and wild animals killed over 100 people every year. During training, I picked up the Burmese language pretty fast. After a few years, I could even talk to local priests, but I didn't fit in very well. I wasn't the heavy drinking type that most officers were. In January 1924, after training, I was sent to a place called Muangma in the Irrawaddy River Delta, about 100 miles west of Yangon. I ran a police station with 20 to 30 men. Later that year, they moved me to Twante, about 30 miles from Yangon but still 2 days away by steamboat. There, I worked as a subdivision officer, running the police station and gathering intelligence from nearby villages. By the end of the year, I was promoted to assistant district superintendent and sent to Syriam. My main job there was to protect the Burma Oil Company refinery. I was much happier in Syriam, right across the Bago River from Yangon. It was one of the few places where I could still enjoy some Western comforts. In April of 1926, I got transferred to Moulmein. That was another good spot because it let me meet my grandmother and aunt. But by the end of that year, they moved me again, this time to Kata, on the banks of the Irrawaddy River, west of Mandalay. While I was there, I caught dengue fever. In July of 1927, they gave me 6 months off so I could go back to England and recover. Even though it was just a sick leave, once I left Burma in late July 1927, I never went back. Still, those 4.5 years left a huge mark on me and on my future as a writer. I saw how brutal British rule was, but I was also shocked by some of the customs among the Burmese people, which Europeans back then thought were backward and primitive. During a family vacation to Cornwall in September 1927, I told everyone I was quitting the Burma police to become a writer instead. My parents were furious. It caused a big fight between me and my father, and we stayed distant for years. That fall, I went to Cambridge to visit an old tutor from Eton and asked him for advice about starting a writing career. He told me to move somewhere where writers and editors were, so I decided to move to London. I found a small place to live on Portobello Road in West London. Later that year, I put on some ragged clothes and went to Limehouse in East London for the first time, pretending to be a tramp. It was the first of many times I would do this. I really cared about the working class, and I was amazed by how kind they were to me. But honestly, I was also gathering material for my writing. In early 1928, I moved to Paris. The exchange rate was good, and Paris was one of the best cities for writers. I wrote a bunch of short pieces for magazines, but none of them got published. I had better luck with journalism, writing about censorship in England, the British working class, and even about my time in Burma. During my first year in Paris, I lived in the Bohemian Latin Quarter with other writers and artists. I often saw my Aunt Nellie Lemousin, who lived nearby. In March 1929, I got really sick with the flu and ended up in the hospital. After that, I spent months living in real poverty with a Russian friend. We both worked as dishwashers, first at a big hotel and later at a restaurant. Aunt Nellie could have helped me with money, so honestly, I think I stayed poor mostly for the experience, to understand it better for my writing. Living and working with the poor in Paris showed me a lot of the dirt and hardship that I would later write about in Down and Out in Paris and London, which was published in 1933. After almost 2 years in Paris, I went back to Southwold in December 1929. While I was still in Paris, I had written a piece called The Spike about my time as a tramp in London. I sent it to the Adelphi magazine. They accepted it but kept asking for changes, so it wasn't actually published until 1931. The Adelphi was a progressive magazine. The editors, Sir Richard Rees and Max Plowman, were both involved in helping working-class people. After meeting them in 1930, I became close friends with both of them for the rest of my life. Even though I didn't get along with my father and Southwold had a reputation as a place for rich people, I stayed there for most of the next 5 years. I worked out of my bedroom in my family's house, and sometimes shocked my family with how weird my lifestyle was. Besides writing about France, I also reviewed books for the Adelphi, and by 1931, I was a regular contributor. I made some extra money tutoring kids of family friends. I also kept going back to London to live like a tramp. One time, I worked as a cleaner for a family in Limehouse. Their kids laughed at my fancy accent. In September 1931, I spent a couple of weeks working in the hop fields in Kent. It was like a summer trip for workers from East London. I kept a detailed diary during that time. My friends and I had to steal food and supplies just to survive. I even had to write home asking my family for 10 shillings because things got so bad. Once we reached the hop fields, though, I was amazed by how generous the other workers were. Even though I tried to talk like them with a Cockney accent, sometimes I slipped back into my normal voice. When that happened, they didn't laugh. They just figured I had fallen on hard times and treated me with even more kindness. After 15 days working more than 10 hours a day in the fields, I got paid on the 19th of September. After taking out the cost of train tickets, I made 16 shillings. When I got back to London, I worked at the Billingsgate Fish Market while writing down my memories from hop picking. I was living in a cheap place on Tooley Street near London Bridge, but it was so dirty and awful that I finally asked my parents for some money and moved to Harrow Road in West London, which was a lot nicer. In early 1932, I finally found a literary agent, Leonard Moore. At the time, I was trying to get a book published based on my time in Paris. I called it A Scullion's Diary. I had even sent it to T.S. Eliot at Faber. He said it was interesting but too short. While I kept trying to get my writing career off the ground, I also got a teaching job at Hawthorne's High School for Boys in Hayes, way out on the edge of London. I called it one of the most God-forsaken places I have struck. In June 1932, Moore told me that Victor Galanche was willing to publish A Scullion's Diary and offered me 40 as an advance. After making a few edits, the book came out in January 1933 under a new title, Down and Out in Paris and London. I didn't want to use my real name, Eric Blair, so I chose a pen name, George Orwell. George came from St. George, England's patron saint, and Orwell came from the River Orwell in Suffolk, a place I loved. It had taken 5 years since I left Burma, but finally, at 29, I was a published author. Even though Down and Out got good reviews and even made it onto the Sunday Express's bestsellers list, my life still felt unstable. People said I was smart and funny, but my writing style seemed old-fashioned compared to what was popular then. By the time I was almost 30, I was pretty unhappy. I even started going to the Anglican church in Hayes for comfort, though later I would be pretty critical of religion. I still wasn't making enough money from writing to live on, so I kept teaching. In 1933, I moved to Frey's College in Uxbridge to teach French. At the same time, my love life wasn't going so well either. In 1930, I proposed to Brenda Salkeld, the daughter of a local clergyman, but she just wanted to stay friends. In 1931, I got close to Eleanor Jacques, but she was already involved with my friend Dennis Collings, and she married him in 1934. In January 1933, I sent Moore about 100 pages of Burmese Days, a novel inspired by my time in Burma. I finished the whole manuscript by November 1933. But then, in late December 1933, I got really sick with pneumonia. I had to go back to Southwold to recover. While I was there, I found out that Gollancz had rejected Burmese Days because he was worried about getting sued for libel. Because of that, Burmese Days was first published in the United States by Harper Brothers in October 1934. The story takes place in a made-up town called Kyauktada, based on Katha, where I had my last posting in Burma. The main character, John Flory, is a lonely teak merchant who prefers the company of a local Indian doctor to the racist European community. He falls for Elizabeth Lackerstein, but she ends up choosing a young army officer, Lieutenant Verrall, instead. Flory tries to defend his Indian friend Dr. Veraswamy against a corrupt Burmese official named U Po Keen. In the end, everything falls apart, and Flory takes his own life. While I was waiting for Burmese Days to come out, I started writing another book, A Clergyman's Daughter. I finished it in about 6 months and gave the manuscript to Moore in early October 1934. The main character, Dorothy Hare, is the daughter of a rector in Suffolk who ends up in London after a mental breakdown. She goes hop-picking in Kent, lives in a boarding house for prostitutes, begs in Trafalgar Square, works at a small private school, and eventually returns home. A lot of it came from my own experiences in Suffolk and London. I later grew to dislike the book and didn't let it be reprinted while I was alive. In late October, thanks to my Aunt Nellie, I got a part-time job at Booklover's Corner, a bookstore in Hampstead. It was run by Francis and my Fanwy Westrope. They let me live in their flat upstairs. So for the first time, I was living full-time in London and getting closer to the literary world. I only worked about 5.5 hours a day, so I had lots of time to write. During most of the 15 months I worked there, I was writing Keep the Aspidistra Flying, a novel about a struggling poet trying to make it in a world that mostly ignored him. It had some bits of my own life in it too, but by then I wasn't completely unknown anymore. While I was at the bookshop, I also got more involved with left-wing politics. The Westropes were longtime members of the Independent Labour Party, a radical group that stayed inside the bigger Labour Party. By late 1934, I hadn't really figured out my full set of political beliefs yet, but I already knew I hated imperialism and cared a lot about fairness. That was pulling me closer to socialism. I spent a lot of time in late 1934 and 1935 talking with Gollancz about my writing. In March 1935, my book A Clergyman's Daughter came out. The reviews were mixed. Some people liked certain scenes, but others didn't like the style or the story much. Gollancz felt good enough about it to go ahead with publishing Burmese Days, but only after I double-checked all the names to make sure none of my characters accidentally shared names with real British officials in Burma. In late June, Burmese Days was published in the UK. The reviews were mostly good, including one from Cyril Connolly, an old friend from my St. Cyprian's and Eton days. We hadn't seen each other in 13 years, but after that, we met up again and stayed close until the end of my life. Around spring 1935, I met Eileen O'Shaughnessy, a psychology student at University College London. Right after we met, I knew I wanted to marry her. We went on a lot of dates that year, but Eileen didn't say yes right away. She wanted to finish her degree first before deciding. While I worked on Keep the Aspidistra Flying, I also became a regular book reviewer for the New English Weekly, a literary magazine that had started in 1932. After I turned in the manuscript for Aspidistra on the 15th of January, 1936, Gollancz had another idea. He suggested I head up north and write about how hard life was there during the Great Depression. On the 31st of January, I left London without a clear plan. By the 3rd of February, I had made it to Manchester. Richard Rees from Adelphi sent me a list of contacts, and thanks to that, I found places to stay in Wigan, Liverpool, Sheffield, Leeds, and Barnsley over the next 2 months. I kept a detailed diary about the people I met, dock workers, miners, and wrote down how shocked I was by the poverty everywhere. While I was in Barnsley, I went to a rally where Sir Oswald Mosley spoke. He used to be a Labour Party minister, but now led the British Union of Fascists. Fascism, started by Mussolini in Italy during the 1920s, tried to blame poor economic conditions on minorities. In 1933, Germany fell under fascist rule too, with Hitler's Nazis taking power. Britain was feeling the pressure too because of the Depression. At the rally, I was horrified, not just by the black shirt supporters who acted violent, but by how easily Mosley got people to believe him. By the end of March, I came back to London. Starting from the 2nd of April, I moved to a tiny cottage in Wallington, a little village in Hertfordshire. I used it as a weekend getaway for the next 10 years or so. When Keep the Aspidistra Flying came out, I was already deep into turning my Northern Journey diary into a book called The Road to Wigan Pier. I'm not sure if Eileen was living with me at Wallington yet, but on the 9th of June, 1936, we got married at the village church. Since George Orwell was just my pen name, and my real name was still Eric Blair to everyone who knew me, Eileen became Mrs. Blair. Eileen gave up her degree, probably thinking she would work alongside me, but she ended up mostly left out of my writing life. By the end of the year, I finished The Road to Wigan Pier and sent it to go launch on the 15th of December. The first half talked about the awful living conditions I had seen up north. The second half was an essay where I tried to explain my political views and thoughts about socialism. It wasn't an easy road to getting it published, but finally, it came out in March 1937. Meanwhile, in late 1936, I was closely following what was happening in Spain. In July, the Spanish Republican government faced a military revolt led by General Francisco Franco. What started in Morocco quickly turned into a full civil war. Franco's nationalists soon got help from Germany and Italy. The Soviet Union started rallying European communists to send fighters to help the Republicans. Late that year, I decided I had to go. I arrived in Barcelona at the end of December. I wanted to write about what was happening for the English working class, and yes, I also wanted to fight. I used my connections with the Independent Labour Party and joined a militia organized by the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, which was revolutionary but anti-Soviet. In early January 1937, we were sent to the Aragon front near Zaragoza. We didn't have the supplies to do much fighting, so most of the time we just did patrols. People said I was brave under fire, but when I wasn't on duty, I spent most of my time reading or writing alone. In March, Eileen came to Spain too. She had made the decision in February to help the cause by working behind the scenes. By then, my unit had moved to the siege lines around Huesca. In one of the wildest moments of my time in Spain, I was with a company that captured an enemy position. But we got counterattacked fast. I threw a bomb to hold off the enemy just long enough for my group to retreat. In late April, I was back in Barcelona, trying to get a transfer to the Madrid front. That meant joining the Communist International Brigade. But before I could leave, I got caught up in the fighting between the anti-Franco groups. The Civil Guard tried to take over the city from the workers' militias for the Republican government, which was starting to fall under Soviet control. For 3 days, I was stuck in a rooftop observatory, holding my ground. On the 6th of May, government troops came in and broke up the militias. After that, I decided it was time to head back to the Aragon front. On the 20th of May, an enemy sniper shot me through the throat. They moved me from hospital to hospital until the doctor said I wasn't fit to fight anymore. I got my discharge papers and went back to Barcelona. When I got there on the 21st of June, Eileen and I got caught up in the government's crackdown on the United Workers' Marxist Party. It was chaos. and we barely escaped Spain after the British consulate helped us get our passports. Those 6 months in Spain changed my life forever. It didn't just shift how I thought about politics, it showed up in almost everything I wrote after that. Spain also made me firmly anti-communist and anti-Stalinist. When I got back to England, I wrote an article about what I had seen in Barcelona. I sent it to the New Statesman, but they rejected it. They said anything that criticized the Republican government sounded like pro-Franco propaganda. I spent the second half of 1937 living in Wallington, writing a full account of my time in Spain. That became Homage to Catalonia. As the months went by, I kept a close eye on the news from Spain, but I knew Franco was going to win. By the end of the year, the book was done. I sent it to Secker, Warburg, because I thought Gollancz, my old publisher, wouldn't want it since it was anti-Stalinist. Homage to Catalonia came out in April 1938. Even though some people liked it, it didn't sell well. Fewer than 700 copies were sold by the end of the year. Meanwhile, I had gotten really sick in early March. I had lung problems and had to spend more than 5 months at Preston Hall Sanatorium in Kent. While I was there, I joined the Independent Labour Party. I believed the communists were just doing what the Soviets wanted, and the Labour Party had become part of the elite. In September, Eileen and I went to Morocco. The trip was supposed to help me get better, but honestly, I hated being there for 6 months. I couldn't wait to get back to England. While I was stuck there, I wrote, "Coming Up for Air." It's about a guy named George Bowling who tries to revisit his old hometown, but finds it totally changed. It's a book about missing the past and feeling lost in a world taken over by business and modern life. I gave the finished manuscript to Moore when I got back to England on the 30th of March, 1939. When it was published by Gollancz in June, it did way better than Homage to Catalonia. The first edition of 2,000 copies sold out. At the end of June, I went to Southwold to be with my father when he was dying. After he passed, I returned to Wallington. I kept a diary about the international events that led to the start of the Second World War in September 1939. Right before the war started, Eileen got a job with the government's censorship department in London. I thought I'd join her there, but I ended up staying in Wallington for another 9 months. Even though I had been against the war at first, once it actually started, I felt it was my duty to help. I wanted to do my part, even with my bad health. Like a lot of writers at the time, I wondered if my work even mattered during a war. But since I couldn't do anything else, I kept writing. I worked on a collection of essays called Inside the Whale, which Gollancz published in March 1940. I also found a new place to publish my work, Horizon, a monthly magazine run by Cyril Connolly, which started on New Year's Day 1940. By May, Eileen and I moved into a flat near Regent's Park in London. That's where we heard the news about the evacuation at Dunkirk and France's surrender on the 17th of June. We also got terrible personal news. Eileen's brother, Lawrence, had been killed while serving as a medic with the British forces. After France fell, everyone was afraid Germany would invade England. The government created the local defense volunteers, later called the Home Guard. In mid-June, I joined a small group of about 10 volunteers in St. John's Wood and soon became a sergeant. We met twice a week and guarded important places like the local phone exchange. At the same time, my publisher Fred Warburg started a new project to bring writers together to talk about the war. He asked me to kick it off with a book about the future of Britain. While bombs were falling on London during the Blitz, I wrote The Lion and the Unicorn. I started by talking about what it means to be English. Then I argued that the defeat at Dunkirk showed capitalism was failing. I believed Britain could only win if it became a socialist country. In my heart, I believed that only ordinary people and workers could save democracy. At the start of 1941, I got a regular job writing a London letter for the American political magazine Partisan Review. For the next few years, it gave me a way to talk about life on the home front and my hopes for how Britain could change after the war. I also stood up for the Home Guard, saying they could really fight if needed. I was glad to see younger, working-class volunteers join to get some soldiering experience before heading into the real army. Even though the German bombings had wrecked a lot of London's financial district and the East End, most people around me didn't seem too scared anymore. By then, after the Royal Air Force won the Battle of Britain, it didn't feel like Germany could actually invade. Still, I felt pretty down because of all the bad news coming in, from Greece, North Africa, and the Middle East. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June, I didn't feel much hope. I figured the Germans wouldn't have made that move unless they were sure they could beat the Soviets fast. I had been back in London for over a year looking for a wartime job. Finally, in August 1941, I was offered a position at the BBC's Indian section as a radio producer. Since I had good memories of India, where I was born, and wanted to help the war effort, I accepted. My work involved preparing 3 English-language news reports every day to broadcast to India, and also to places under Japanese control like Malaya and Indonesia. Some news was translated into local languages, and we also made political and cultural programs. I really liked being able to bring in Indian writers and help share their work with a bigger audience. But since India was full of political unrest, I had to be careful. I started to get annoyed when offices like the India office kept complaining about the things I said or the guests I invited. In March 1942, I picked up my diary again after a 6-month break and wrote that all we are doing at present is useless, or slightly worse than useless. I even wondered if anyone was actually listening. It wasn't until years later that I found out that my broadcasts meant a lot to people stuck under Japanese rule. Working at the BBC also made me think more about India. I wrote an essay about Rudyard Kipling that year for Horizon magazine. In it, I talked about how the British exploited India, but also admitted that I admired the hard-working people who built the empire. I also kept a close eye on India's future. In March 1942, Sir Stafford Cripps was sent to India with an offer. Help Britain win the war now, and India would get self-government later. But the mission failed. Neither the British government nor the Indian nationalists were happy with the deal. I admired Cripps, though. He stuck to his principles, and I wasn't the only one who thought he might someday challenge Churchill for leadership. Meanwhile, the war started to turn around. Germany stalled at Stalingrad, and the British made gains in North Africa. By late 1942, things looked a little better for the Allies. Still, I was getting more and more tired of working at the BBC. In September 1943, I turned in my resignation and officially left on the 24th of November. After that, I became the literary editor for the Tribune, a left-wing newspaper backed by Stafford Cripps and edited by Labour MP Anurin Bevan. Even though a lot of Tribune readers didn't like how I criticized the Soviet Union during the wartime alliance, I was glad Bevan supported me. I also started writing a column called As I Please, where I talked about whatever was on my mind, everything from war news to the roses at my Wallington cottage. I didn't just work for Tribune. I also kept writing for Partisan Review and Horizon, and since late 1941, I had been contributing to the Observer newspaper too. At the same time, through 1943, I was working on a new novel. It was a warning about the dangers of totalitarianism, told through an animal story, where the animals on a farm overthrow their human owners. By February 1944, I finished the manuscript for Animal Farm. I knew it would be hard to find a publisher. people still had warm feelings towards Stalin and the Soviet Union. I first tried Golange but knew he wouldn't want to publish it. In May, Jonathan Cape read the manuscript and seemed interested. But by late June, he backed out after someone at the Ministry of Information warned him not to offend the Soviets. I had avoided contacting Warburg because they had a paper shortage, but in July, I got word that they were willing to publish Animal Farm if they could find the paper. By September, we agreed the book would come out the next year. Because of all the problems, it wouldn't be published until August 1945. While I was struggling to get Animal Farm published, my personal life was changing too. I had been married to Eileen for 8 years, but we hadn't been able to have kids. We decided to adopt. Through Eileen's sister-in-law, Gwen O'Shaughnessy, who worked with unmarried mothers in Newcastle, we found a child to bring into our family. I adopted a baby boy who was born on the 14th of May, 1944. We named him Richard Horatio Blair. At first, we sent him to Greystone, the O'Shaughnessy family house about 25 miles south of Newcastle. At the end of June, our flat got bombed. We couldn't move into a new place in Islington until October, and only then were we able to bring Richard down from Newcastle. In 1942, Eileen left her job at the Ministry of Information to work at the Ministry of Food, but later she quit to take care of Richard full-time. In February 1945, I accepted a job as a war correspondent for the Observer and the Manchester Evening News. I left for Paris, while Eileen and Richard stayed at Greystone. While I was arranging Richard's legal adoption in London, Eileen got sick. Doctors found several tumors on her uterus. She needed an immediate hysterectomy, which was scheduled for the 29th of March in a hospital in Newcastle. But shortly after they put her under anesthesia, she died of heart failure. She was only 39 years old. I was sick in Paris at the time, but when I heard the news, I rushed back to England. After Eileen's funeral in Newcastle, even though I was heartbroken, I decided to go back to my work as a wartime correspondent. I followed the Allied troops as they pushed east into Germany. I reported on the terrible destruction the war had caused. I stayed a few weeks after Germany surrendered on the 8th of May, watching the last German soldiers being rounded up. By the end of May, I returned to London. By the end of June, I found a nurse for Richard. In July, he finally came back to live with me in our Islington flat. In August, Animal Farm was published. It was a huge success. We sold almost 5,000 copies in just 6 weeks. For the first time, I was seen as one of the top writers of the time. Animal Farm told the story of animals who take over a farm, led by 2 pigs, Snowball and Napoleon. At first, things got better, but soon the 2 pigs fought over how to run the farm. Napoleon chased Snowball away with trained dogs. Then, with the help of a young pig named Squealer, Napoleon convinced everyone that Snowball was a traitor. Napoleon's rule turned cruel, and by the end, the pigs acted just like the humans they had replaced. I wrote Animal Farm as a warning about Stalin's dictatorship. Napoleon stood for Stalin, and Snowball stood for Trotsky, the leader Stalin pushed out after Lenin's death in 1924. Even after Trotsky was exiled in 1929, Stalin hunted him until he was killed in Mexico in 1940. After Animal Farm's success, I worried that conservatives would use my book to attack socialism itself, not just Stalin. I made it clear I was still a socialist. I even welcomed Clement Attlee's Labour government when they won the election in July 1945. But I was disappointed that bigger changes didn't happen. By then, I was thinking about writing a new novel. It would be about a dark, totalitarian future. I also wanted to leave London. Eileen and I had talked about moving to the countryside so I could focus more on my writing. In September 1945, I started planning a move to Jura, a remote Scottish island. I rented a farmhouse called Barnhill. While it was being fixed up, I stayed in London with Richard and our housekeeper nurse, Susan Watson. I was lonely and in poor health. I even proposed marriage to a few younger women, but they all said no. I wanted to move to Jura in the spring of 1946, but I had a bad tubercular hemorrhage in February, and then my sister Marjorie died. I didn't get to Jura until the end of May. At Barnhill, I lived with my sister Avril, Richard, and Susan. The house was nice, but really far from everything. 7 miles to the nearest village, Ardlusa. I had to buy a motorbike to go get groceries and supplies. The isolation helped me work on my novel, but it made keeping in touch with friends almost impossible. Some friends decided not to visit when they realized getting to Jura would take nearly 2 days of trains, buses, boats, and sometimes even walking if the road was bad. I promised my agent, Leonard Moore, that I'd have most of the novel done by early autumn, but life on Jura kept getting in the way. I had seen the rise of Hitler and Stalin firsthand and watched how governments twisted the truth during the war. I believed that the misuse of language was the root of totalitarianism. I wanted this new novel to be a clear warning to the world. Even though my health was failing, I pushed myself to keep writing. By September, I had written about 50 pages. I went back to London to catch up with friends and deal with work. Meanwhile, a BBC radio version of Animal Farm was broadcast in January 1947. I also switched publishers, moving from Victor Galanche to Secker Warburg. By April, I was back at Barnhill, trying hard to finish my novel by early 1948. But I kept getting sick, and it slowed me down. Susan Watson, who had been helping out, left Barnhill after falling out with my sister Avril the previous autumn. Luckily, my friend Richard Reese decided to stay most of the year to look after me. I had almost finished the first draft when I planned a trip to London in November, but I was too sick to travel. A doctor came all the way up to Ardlusa and told me I had tuberculosis. Just before Christmas, I had to be admitted to a hospital near Glasgow. In the spring, I started feeling a little better and went back to Jura. Against my doctor's advice, they wanted me to rest 6 hours a day. I went right back to work on the second draft. By October, the manuscript was ready to be typed, but I got really sick again. I asked my publisher, Fred Warburg, to find someone willing to come up to Barnhill and help type it. When no one could be found by mid-November, I typed it myself. Together, Fred and I picked a title, 1984. We chose a future year where the world I described could happen. At the start of 1949, I left Jura for good and moved to a sanatorium in the Cotswolds. Fred was shocked when he read my manuscript. He thought it was a harsh attack on the Soviet Union and worried it might be seen as anti-Soviet propaganda. But really, 1984 wasn't about Russia. It was based on a darker version of wartime England. In the book, England became Airstrip 1, part of a huge power called Oceania, always at war with Eurasia and Eastasia. Big Brother, the leader, was everywhere. On posters, on TV, in public and private life. The party kept control through spying, using two-way TVs and secret microphones run by the thought police. The main character, Winston Smith, worked at the Ministry of Truth, where he had to change old newspapers to fit the party's lies. I based the ministry's look on the University of London's Senate House and the inside on my old BBC office. Winston hated the party deep down and wrote in his diary in a small corner of his room where he thought the cameras couldn't see him. Then he met Julia, who also hated Big Brother. They fell in love but got caught by the thought police. After being tortured in room 101, the place where each person's worst fears come true, Winston and Julia betrayed each other. By the end, Winston was brainwashed. He even said he loved Big Brother. Even though I said I wanted to write more books, my health kept getting worse. 1984 came out in June. 25,000 copies were printed across the US and Britain. It sold well, got great reviews, and lifted my spirits, but it didn't make me any healthier. In September, I moved to University College Hospital in London, close to Senate House, the building that had inspired the Ministry of Truth. I still hoped to get better. I even proposed to Sonia Brownell, a woman I had asked once before. This time, she said yes. We got married on the 13th of October. I sat up in my hospital bed during the ceremony. For a short while after, I felt a bit better. In the new year, plans were made for me to go to Switzerland, not because anyone thought I would get better, but so I could have some peace. But I never made it there. 4 days before I was supposed to leave, I died on the 21st of January, 1950, at the age of 46. Looking back, I can say my life was never easy, but it was always real. I didn't set out to become famous. I just wanted to tell the truth as I saw it, even when it hurt. I lived among the poor, fought in wars, lost people I loved, and battled sickness that never really let me go. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. I doubted myself many times, but through it all, I kept writing, because I believed words could still mean something in a world full of lies. Animal Farm and 1984 weren't just stories, they were warnings. They were hopes that maybe, just maybe, people would see the dangers before it was too late. I wasn't trying to kill dreams or destroy ideals. I was trying to protect them by showing what happens when power goes unchecked and truth gets twisted. When I died on the 21st of January, 1950, I was only 46. But by then, I had said what I needed to say. I wasn't looking for statues or honors. If anything of me is worth remembering, let it be this. Stay awake. Speak the truth, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because freedom is never given. It's fought for. One word, one action, one life at a time.